So joining us now to talk all about it is our friend Morgan Wright, Chief Security Advisor over at SentinelOne. Morgan, always a pleasure to have you here. Explain for our viewers what happened in this attack and how are things going with getting this back online here?
Right. Hey, again, thanks for having me on. I mean, this is kind of a watershed moment. Normally, only nation states can attack infrastructure at this scale. Now we're seeing criminal groups do it. What happened here? In this case, when you see infrastructure like this that deals with power energy, there's usually two systems. There's the administrative or the IT system on one side of the house. Then there's what's called the industrial control system, the systems that actually manage the flow of fuel and gasoline, manage the pipeline. It does not appear at this moment that they got into the very sensitive part, the ICS. Had they done that, they could have blown up, literally caused back pressure, shut down valves, blown up things. This has happened before in Germany and other places where a steel plant, a blast furnace, was severely damaged this way. So they've been able to get to the IT system, but because that IT system, the administrative system, controls the billing and understanding where things are going, and managing schedules, they've effectively shut everything down. And to your point, it's 5 days and counting. Who knows how long it's going to take? On average, it can take up to 6 months to fully remediate, get rid of all of the bad stuff that's in there, and get back to the way they were the day before this happened. So for Colonial, they still have a long road to go. The question is, how fast, though, can they get back to being operational, get that fuel and diesel and jet fuel moving, especially now that we're coming out of the pandemic, flights are starting to pick up. This could have a huge impact on the airline industry up and down the East Coast.
6 months, Morgan, that is insane to think about that.
It sucks, I tell you.
Yeah, and I've heard some analysts say, listen, if we could get this back online potentially tomorrow, by Wednesday, sort of the key date, it would have a negligible effect. Essentially, you wouldn't see a rise in gas prices or anything, but every day, essentially, after Wednesday, you potentially start to see a cataclysmic effect potentially get worse and worse and worse. How bad could this potentially be? If it does take 6 months, what happens?
What they would get is they would get increments of operational capability. It's not like they go from 0 to 100 overnight, but they would be able to bring certain things back online. And when I say 6 months to fully get rid of it, that means 6 months to have that 100% confidence that all of the bad malware, the ransomware, is out of the system. Things are back to where they were. You've recovered data. You've got, you've backed up your data. You've restored it. So, we've seen this happen over and over again. Unfortunately, I just saw a report this morning too, where there was a 62% increase in ransomware attacks last year. If we're spending so much money on cybersecurity and it's such a focus, why are things getting worse and not better? Normally, when we spend money and focus on a problem, it gets better. But in this case with ransomware, it's not.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned all that because we remember the SolarWinds incident just recently, and they say, listen, Congress is saying this will take us years to really fully digest what the hackers were able to access here. Does this essentially mean, because we have this and the SolarWinds attack and probably others that we're unaware of, Morgan, that the U.S. has really big issues when it comes to our cybersecurity and that we need serious upgrades here?
Yeah, one thing people should keep in mind to put this in perspective, 85% of all critical infrastructure in the United States is owned by the private sector, not the government. So the question is how much should the government do or how much can the government do? But I will tell you what's happening. There's 2 days of reckoning coming. One is around the use of cryptocurrency. The other one is about the responsibility for you taking the appropriate steps to protect your networks, just like they did with Sarbanes-Oxley. We don't see CEOs going to jail anymore for misstating financials. Why? Because people got the message, hey, if I sign off on this and it's wrong, I'm going to jail. Well, we've got to get to that point where we have to treat misstating financials the same way we do about ignoring problems in your network or not taking the steps necessary to defend and protect your network. Because guess what? It just doesn't affect Colonial. It affects me. At the end of the day, guess who gets affected? You and me, we're the consumers. Who pays the price for this? We do. At the pump, at the grocery store, for the goods that we buy, the fuel cost to transport this stuff. At the end of the day, it's the consumer biting the bullet on this one.
Absolutely. So, Morgan, what's not to stop a hacker from going after, say, the power grid? What's not to stop them from doing something even worse from that? Is that potentially the road that we're going on right now based on what's happened so far?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. This was a watershed event. We've actually seen this happen before. December 23rd, 2015, Russia launched the first dark energy attack against Ukraine. Took out 750,000 homes for hours, disabled the power backups on a lot of at the Zaporizhia hydroelectric plant. It's being done. What normally happens is there is some seminal event, and this is one of those to where it says, hey, guess what? A criminal organization now can wield as much power as a nation state used to be able to do to take down large swaths of the infrastructure. So guess what? You want to bring a nation to its knees? It's a maxim of war that's been shown to be true year after, decade after decade. You go after two things: power and water. They've already gone after power. They go after energy. They can go after water. This would cause chaos we haven't seen. I'm not trying to say the sky is falling, but what I'm saying is people need to get real and understand. As long as we allow Bitcoin to go unregulated, I know that's not going to be popular with folks, but the criminals and the terrorists have ruined it for everyone else. That's the only way these guys get paid. You take away their ability to get monetized, you'll take away the ability for them to actually conduct these kind of ransomware campaigns.
Listen, you bring up a lot of really good points, Morgan. And by the way, Congress is negotiating potentially on Joe Biden's infrastructure package. Could security measures be something that Congress addresses in the infrastructure package? Could this be something that they look at here finally on this?
Yeah, out of the Senate hearing, you can tell how exciting has my life been during COVID. I've actually been watching congressional hearings, and so I watched this. I watched the Senate hearing. But what you're seeing coming out of the one that was back in March, the first one that they had on the SolarWinds, you will start to see things. I think mandatory breach reporting. In other words, we're not going to do this dance of waiting 30 or 45 days before we let out this little cryptic statement that something might have happened to our networks. I think we're going to see that if you get hit with something like this, or any kind of breach, they'll have to define it. You've got to immediately report it potentially to the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, part of DHS. You might have to report it to another agency. I think we're going to have to see mandatory reporting. There's going to have to be mandatory notifications and the sharing of intelligence as soon as this happens so that we stop this. But I think that's some of the legislative stuff you'll see. I definitely think mandatory breach reporting is going to be one of the first things that they come out with from a regulatory, if not a legislative standpoint.
Morgan, you mentioned cryptocurrency. Obviously, the hackers looking into using Bitcoin as a form of payment in all of this. We've seen widespread acceptance of many different forms of cryptocurrency from banks, from payment processors to the like. Does that essentially signal to you that this is Congress's opportunity here to really signal maybe some regulation issues when it comes to cryptocurrency? Is this the opportunity for them to do that?
This actually was going on before this happened. Actually, the U.S. Treasury is looking for information on how to track the payment of cryptocurrency to what's called SDN, specially designated nationals. There's an SDN list. It's part of the Office of Foreign and Asset Control, things that we do to prohibit payments to entities or people when they're bad people, they're terrorists, they're criminals. And so the U.S. Treasury right now is looking to say, how can we find and track the payment of cryptocurrency? Hey, it would never be Cheddar. I was listening to your previous statement. Cheddar would never, you guys would be okay with your crypto because you're not bad. These other folks, though, would be used for bad stuff. But that's the problem. They've taken something that could be very transformative, the ability to close international transaction in 10 minutes as opposed to days. But yet the terrorists, the criminals, guys like this, guess what they're doing? They're also saying is governments now are going to get involved. Why? Because they're going to use this as the reason to say we can no longer allow these organizations to run unabated without some regulatory capacity over cryptocurrency, because guess what? It fuels terrorism. It funds terrorism. That's why the OFAC list and the sanctions say if you make ransomware payments, you might be subject to U.S. sanctions because they might be going to these terrorist groups, designated terrorist organizations. So the bad guys, once again, are ruining it the day for the good guys, and they're going to impact cryptocurrency, I think, in a way that's going to get regulatory and legislative action taken against it to say you now have to start disclosing. We're going to start losing this veil in anonymity, and we want to see where the money goes.
Oh, it's just so terrifying. Morgan, always a pleasure to have you here. Your insights are so great on this. Morgan Wright is the Chief Security Advisor over at SentinelOne.